Welcome, everyone. Let's wait a few seconds for more people to join, and we'll start in a second. Okay, let's get started. So welcome back to Polycon UK webinars. Today we have Matias Iaryczower from Princeton presenting Reputation in a Committee with Multiple Principals, the case of the FOMC. This is a joint work with Gabriel Lopez-Moctezuma and Paola Moscariello. So we, as usually, have 1 hour that includes 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to ask questions during the talk. We are okay with this. Or ask in the chat. We are going to monitor the chat as well. Just a reminder, we do record this talk. And Matias, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, everybody, for having me here. It's a great event that I very much support, and thank you, everybody, for being here. So yeah, this is a joint work with Gabriel Lopez-Moctezuma and Paola, who's a graduate soon to be on the market, a gifted theorist. So yeah, so pay attention to her. Okay, so let me begin with a broad introduction. So we are very aware that reputational considerations are a key force in political agency relationships, and by political agency relationships, I'm being not as broad as I should be. It's also in different kind of principal agent relationships. But it's in particular, it's a key aspect in public policy, right? And the problem, and of course, one would separate moral hazard and adverse selection. Moral hazard can sometimes be actually induce more effort and be a positive influence to in these principal agent relationships. But adverse selection, as we know, can induce agents to take actions in the spirit of building this reputation that are not consistent with optimal policy making, right? Sometimes ignoring their information or overreacting to their information. And the general question that the literature, both theoretical literature and empirical literature, has tried to answer in different ways is what is the effect of career concerns and these reputational incentives on policy outcomes. So we're going to try to make progress on this front by doing empirical work that is informed by theory. Our starting point, but I'm not saying anything too wild here, is that the incentives to build reputation and the associated distortions or corrections to pre-existing biases are going to depend on decision makers' preferences, characteristics, and the informational environment, right? So in order to kind of have a deep understanding of the problem, in our view, we need to try to also kind of disentangle what are preferences, what are incentives, what is the effect in equilibrium of preferences, incentives, information, and environment on the actions that policymakers take. Now, this is all good and fine, and but in a sense, the problem is compounded in committees because the actions and strategies of other committee members are going to affect the signaling value of the actions of each member. Therefore, there is a wide literature. Typically, we have theoretical models that assume a lot of homogeneity, sometimes leading, as we're going to see, I'm going to talk in a second, to this ideas about like conformity. But in general, when we have people who have different preferences, different biases, and different incentives, because they might be talking they might have different value for reputation and talking to different principals. This conflicting preference and incentives can affect the current behavior of all members, right? So that's kind of the second layer of studying this problem in committees. So again, we want to understand what is the effect of career concerns on these collective outcomes and individual behavior in collective setups, and what kind of institutions and committee compositions perform better. So we're going to consider these questions within the Federal Open Market Committee, the central bank in the US. We think this is a great setup because of basically three reasons, besides this being obviously a very important policy domain on its own, is that there is already robust existing evidence of reputational concerns in the FOMC. First. Second, the FOMC has a very interesting constitutional configuration in the sense that it has a mixed membership with 7 members of the board of governors that I'm going to call governors from now on, and 5 voting and 7 non-voting regional reserve bank presidents. The governors are appointed by the US president with confirmation by the Senate. Presidents are appointed by regional boards of directors, including industry, financial institutions, academia. So in a sense, we have possibly different selection and incentives going on for governors and presidents. So we're going to exploit this variation to kind of get at the problem. The third is, as you might know or not, there is kind of this that I'm going to call quote unquote natural experiment, a change of regime, of informational regime, right? From opaque, what I'm going to call opaque, to transparent. The transcripts, so in November 93, the FOMC started releasing the verbatim transcripts of meetings, and and the transcripts were published going back to 1970, right? So the members at the time were acting under the assumption that this was not going to become public information, and then it did. So we have individual. So this is kind of a very nice setup for empirical analysis, because we have individual decisions that are made both in the transparent regime, where people are aware that this is going to be, given to the public, and we also have individual decisions that are made under the opaque regime. So we have the combination of being able to study an opaque regime that with individual voting data. Right? So what we're going to do in this paper is we're going to combine this natural experiment with a structural approach to estimate the value that FOMC members give to individual reputation relative to policy outcomes. So by this, I mean the preferences, right? The value that they give to reputation in relative to getting the actual policy right with their own biases and information. Of course, we're also gonna, as we do this, we're gonna also estimate their preferences, policy preferences in terms of bias and quality of information. And, if we think that the true model has career concerns, then if we were to estimate bias and quality of information without allowing for reputation, we would be kind of getting the wrong estimate. So we're going to have a model that includes these things. And so once we have the parameters, we're going to use that and the model to quantify the probability of correct recommendations in the transparent and opaque regimes, and also with no career concerns, because we can do that in sort of like a counterfactual of sorts and compare the behavior under no career concerns and under career concerns under opaque or transparent regimes. And we're going to, once we have that, so once I tell you the effectiveness of the FOMC in the data, then we're gonna be able to use this to change committee compositions and recompute equilibrium to see how, what is the effect of different kind of membership setups on outcomes. I'm not including here, but we're working on, we just have to wrap it up. As I will mention that there are local shocks, local macro shocks that affect the incentives and behavior of presidents who are kind of in charge of this regional economists in some sense. And we were also doing counterfactuals in terms of changing the scale of the shocks and the correlation in the shocks across different regions, but I don't have this for you today. So that's coming. So I'm gonna move fast on the results overview, but in the because we'll see all these things. But just to give you a panoramic, so we're gonna find that the typical governor has better information, is more dovish, and has higher reputational concerns than the typical president. But again, there's considerable heterogeneity within the class. So because we're going to be able to estimate this information preferences, both for policy and reputation at the individual level, so we can say these things. We're going to find also, so this is in terms of preferences, then going to behavior work and outcomes, we're going to find that the typical governor is more accurate. And more accurate, I mean the ex-ante probability of a correct recommendation, weighting the two types of errors that one can make, than the typical president. And the typical president, typically, the difference here is coming more because they do worse conditional on the economy being in a recession. Reputational concerns increase vote accuracy. So this is ex-ante, right? Again, so in the ex-ante version of probability of correct recommendation, reputational concerns increase vote accuracy. So this might be surprising to some. It's not completely puzzling. I'll tell you where this is coming from. And there are losses in booms and gains in recessions, but overall, so I'll show you that. But overall, we find typically reputational concerns increase vote accuracy. And if we compare the two regimes, there's generally larger accuracy ex-ante in the transparent than the opaque regimes. Now, in terms of what kind of distortion reputation increase induces, so hopefully everybody's familiar with the term pandering. This is kind of overreacting towards the prior of the principal in order to gain an advantage as being perceived as competent. Anti-pandering is overreacting against the prior. And we find throughout the sample, we have anti-pandering, and transparency increases the level of anti-pandering more so for presidents. But we're going to decompose the total change from no career concerns to the career concerns behavior that we observe in the data as having two components. One is anti-pandering, and one is signaling moderation. So in a setup, as I'm going to explain, in a setup in which we have biases, we need to, there is an incentive of not just playing towards or against the prior, but signaling that you're more moderate than you really are. And this actually is the force that induces transparency and reputation to improve outcomes in the ex-ante sense. And then we're going to have a counterfactual exercises in which we change committee compositions. And for example, we're going to say, what if we had only governors in the FOMC, only presidents, or only members with economic experience, academics, or with financial experience, or with central bank experience. And we find throughout, I'll show you the numbers, but throughout we find that transparency again beats opaque, which beats the no career concerns outcomes in the effectiveness ex ante. So that's what I'm going to be describing.
Can I ask a clarification question here?
Yes.
So your main identification is between the opaque and transparency. So I don't understand how the career concerns is thrown on. Is it a theoretical prediction that you have?
Well, yeah, so everything here, so we're going to take the model as the true data generating process, as we always do.
Okay.
But my model is not going to be just a linear regression. It's going to be a model that is going to come from the parameters, the fundamentals into generating outcomes, through equilibrium. And once I recover the parameters of the model, then I'm going to be able to say what would happen if this guy had no credit concerns. I'm going to be able to give you an assessment for that.
So I now I understand. Thanks, but just to understand the sort of policy tools, because I can understand how opaqueness versus transparency is a tool that you can deploy or not. But how can you shut down independently career concerns?
Oh, absolutely. This is not a tool, but this is something this is me, the scientist, right? Like this is me trying to understand
Gotcha.
the world. And I apologize that I still have this kind of draft thing. This is me being lazy. Sorry about that. So I'm gonna be missing a lot of literature here and there, but just to give you an idea. So I think we're all aware that of the kind of the forces that have been recognized in the literature in terms of when we have signaling for competence. We have the I'm missing the other term that was used for pandering, but so some people call it herding, which is confusing, but this is because the literature, even the earliest papers on this actually started with multiple experts. And there's that force is to follow the behavior of others. But conceptually, in single agent models, when you have, so you can have pandering, or as in this Keynes-Ron, Heron, and Schotts paper, or in Levy, anti-pandering. The distinction is going to come from our collective understanding is that this is coming from whether the agents know or not their type, although there are other things that matter there as well. But we understand that there are these forces of in terms of like as you're trying to signal competence, to play towards the prior or play against the prior. When we have models in which people try to signal preference alignment, which there's a lot less of this. We like this paper by Morris on political correctness, for example, or Stasavash, and here the informative equilibrium basically is going to be more likely to exist with low reputational concerns or with transparency. And then there is a bigger literature on, again, signaling competence in collective setups. And by this, I mean both in a committee, like Levy and Visser and Swank, or sequential by play of multiple experts. And again, here we have the idea of herding or conformity. One point that I'm going to make here is that I think there is a little bit of confusion is too strong a word, but the literature, the theoretical literature, with the models that we have, typically assume a lot of homogeneity across members. And therefore, the idea of conformity in this interdependent value setups is very straightforward, right? The idea is, listen, imagine that we are all seeing something that is correlated with a state. If we have better information, forget about correct concerns. If we have better information, then we're gonna every one of us is gonna track the state more closely. That's gonna imply that we're gonna be more correlated to one another, right? If we were good. Now, if you have strategic agents trying to manipulate their reputation, then they're gonna have an incentive to conform with each other because that's what good agents would do, right? They would vote together, right? So you have that, but the moment you make the committee heterogeneous, both in terms of ability or in terms of preferences, that's not necessarily going to be something that shows up, right? So it could be that you're following some, it could be that you're playing in a different way, completely different than conformity. The key thing is that as we're going to see, to some extent, because I'm going to be very brief on the theory part, but the key thing is that the actions of other members inform the principal about the state, right? There's additional signals that the principal can observe, and that's the channel through which they interact. So you're going to basically play according to, in responding to the information that the expected information the principal is going to have, more than necessarily following the votes of others, which is what happens if you make the committee homogeneous. So let me start with oh, I'm going too slow. Let me start with three basic facts. So the first two facts are known, although we're doing this in a slightly different way than what the literature has done. So we're going to basically do a diff and diff using the transparency change and variation across presidents and governors, exploiting the mixed membership in the committee. So the first thing is that on average, transparency, so my main point here is that transparency affects behavior, right? The change of an institution that doesn't affect selection, that doesn't affect, preferences or the information of the members, affect behavior, clearly. There is a very strong evidence for that. Then we can talk about what is it that we're finding, but we're definitely finding, as a community, I'm saying, that the change in the institutions regulating the informational environment affect behavior. This, I see it as very robust evidence for the existence of career concerns and this not being a second order effect. Now, in particular, we have that transparency reduces dissent on average among voting members for governors and voting presidents. This, from previous literature and also in our specification, we see that clearly. The second point that is well established is that presidents are on average more hawkish than governors. And you can see it here. And by the way, this is both in terms of voting and in terms of text, following the Pratt et al. Paper on the analysis of FOMC deliberation, the corpus of deliberation. But the second is, not only are presidents on average more hawkish than governors, presidents are more responsive to local economic conditions than governors, right? So these guys respond to the economy in their own region. Now, this is known. What is not known, or what was not known, to at least in our, to the best of our knowledge, is that a finding that we think is interesting is that heterogeneous regional shocks increase differences in behavior after transparency. So what I mean by this is that the presidents not only are responsive to shocks in a way that governors don't, but to local shocks. By this I mean the regional unemployment relative to national unemployment, for example. But the difference in behavior magnify under transparency, which is not completely going with the idea of more conformity, right? Okay, so let me give you the model. So the plan is I'm gonna give you the model, go very briefly through the results, because I'm not gonna have time to, if I were to go deeply into the analysis on the theory, we wouldn't even be close to finishing. But I'm gonna give you the model, present the basic results, and then I'm gonna go to identification estimation and then discuss the results. So we have an N-member committee that chooses to implement a dovish or a hawkish monetary policy under two regimes, opaque or transparent. So this opaque and transparent are going to be two different games, right? So there are no connection between the games. In the opaque regime, only the final decision is observed. In the transparent regime, all the recommendations, individual recommendations, are observed by the public. And we're going to call this funky YR, the outcome observed by the public in regime R. So you guys can stop me if at any point I'm not being clear, please do. So the economy, we're gonna assume that a binary, unobservable state, right? So the economy is gonna be in a recessionary or an inflationary state, omega 0 or 1, and the prior that the economy is in a boom is rho. We're gonna, now this is the key part, right? So we want to introduce reputational concerns, but we wanna do it in a tractable manner, right? Because I'll explain, you know, if I get a chance, what would be the complication of. So let me start here. So if we imagine we have multiple principles with a very large space of attributes, latent attributes that we want to recover, in principle, you would have to kind of compute the equilibrium, understanding that, you know, we're going to have the strategies are going to have predictive behavior for every possible type you might have. This is very complicated and difficult to grab from the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to simplify that, but we want to simplify while preserving a rich space of characteristics for each committee member, right? So because if we make them all too simplistic, the model is not going to be able to hit the data well. So our answer here is we're going to introduce a behavioral type who's an expert decision maker, while allowing the policy preferences, reputational considerations, and quality of information of the strategic type to vary flexibly across members. So the basic idea is you can be, and I'm going to describe what all of this means, but you can be an expert or you can be a strategic agent. If you're a strategic agent, we're all going to know that you have some quality of information, some bias, some reputational considerations. The thing is, we don't know if you're that type or the expert. So with priority P, I is an expert. The expert is going to observe the state perfectly well and chooses and matches it with her action. With priority 1 minus PI, member I is a strategic decision maker with a bias pi I, an ability theta I, and career concerns delta I, all common knowledge. So let me say more about the strategic agent. So we're going to have that the strategic agent observes a signal that is correlated with the state, right? So here, theta is the ability. So imagine that you're getting signals from two normal distributions that can be centered in state 1 or 0, depending on the realization of omega. And the variance of those normals are going to be given by theta, right? So if you have very good information, that means that the conditional distribution of signals is very precise. So that's one part. Then we're gonna have, you know, I'm gonna say if you get it right, if you have a hawkish monetary policy in a boom or a dovish policy in a recession, then your payoff is 0. And you're going to have these payoffs here, like if you have a hawkish policy in a recession, you're going to have a cost minus pi I, and the other one is -1 minus pi I. Now, you might say, you might object to the specifics of the zeros of the minus pi I, -1 minus pi I. Let me tell you, I've been working with these models for a while now, these types of models, and I always say this because I think it helps. Anytime you have a model when you have interdependent values and private values as well, the private values, however you want to see them, right? Like coming from a fully founded, micro-founded ideological part, or whatever it is that the private values are responding to, the private values are just going to put a hump, a hurdle on the public information to go one way or the other, right? So at the end of the day, everything is going to be, there's going to be some threshold that the posterior has to surpass in order for you to go one way or the other. And if you're more hawkish or more dovish, so if you're more hawkish, your cutoff is going to be, you know, from a half going to 0, because for most posteriors you would do a hawkish policy. If you're dovish, it's going to be the other way around. So it's a very flexible model. There is, you know, yes, with full information, these models produce full common interest, but as a behavioral tool for us, because everything is happening interim, right? When people don't have nobody's here informed about the state. So there's going to be heterogeneity of interest, right? So it's going to be conflict of interest in the interim stage. So I talked about information. I talked about preferences. Strategic decision makers also care about competence. So this is the principles posterior that they are an expert given the information they have. And therefore, their payoff is, the policy payoff, delta, and then so PIR of the outcome that the principals observe is the principals belief that the agent is an expert. And this is an expectation of the principal's belief, given the information that you have now. Why is that? It's, what is it that you don't see? You don't see the actions of your fellow committee members, right? So you have to, that's the strategic uncertainty that's going to happen. So delta here is going to capture how much the agent cares about her reputation relative to the decision at hand. The strategy, beta, is going to be the probability that a strategic decision maker chooses a hawkish policy in regime R. I call it strategy because, of course, this is not the full strategy, but the experts are just being machines. So I'm just going to call the strategy part from the strategic decision makers as the strategy.
Can I ask you a short question just to clarify my thinking?
Yes, Max.
So here it's R that could be opaque or transparent.
Yes.
But the reputation, these people convert, even regardless of whether this is opaque or transparent, it's all transparent for them because they take part in these committee meetings and they know what was going on. So when we talk about opaque, it's only against the rest of the world, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Simple answer. Sorry,
was I supposed to say more?
No.
Yes, but this is right. So this is what this funky Y is that function that tells you what is the outcome that the principal is going to observe when people behave in the way they do, right? Yes, and not only the pi's and the theta and the delta is going to be known for the principals conditional on you being a strategic decision maker, but also the committee, I'm assuming the committee members know each other's attributes, right? So an equilibrium in principle would be a perfect Bayesian equilibrium or a sequential equilibrium, but because the principals are basically we're just going to get rewarded as a function of their beliefs, they're basically non-players, and the equilibrium is gonna be a Bayesian Nash equilibrium of the voting game, with the other constraint that the principal's beliefs are determined by Bayes' rule from agents' equilibrium strategies. Now, to close the model, I need to say something about how outcomes are aggregated. This is not going to matter in transparency at all, but it's going to matter in opaque, as I'll explain a little bit later. We're going to say, so the way this actually goes is there is this round. So there are two types of votes that these people take. One is the official vote, and first is this vote in the deliberation round, right? So in the official vote, there is no disagreement, right? So the official vote never contradicts the chair's recommendation. But what we think of the important vote is the deliberation vote, where everybody says what they would want, and then that's aggregated in some way by the chair. Admittedly, this is not a known function. This is behavior by the chair. And then the chair makes a recommendation after seeing all these votes, and that recommendation is always followed, right? But there are some dissents, but very few. And I don't have the data here, but very few. So what we're doing is we're taking the chair and that vote, we're folding it, and we're saying what the chair is going to recommend is going to be the majority position in the deliberation vote. Now, so that's the assumption we're going to make, that this is by a simple majority at the deliberation stage. The logic for that is kind of, or the background for that is this kind of correlation that says that the policy proposed by the chair that is always adopted is very correlated with the position of the median in the deliberation vote. So that's our assumption. Now, so we have the model. I should say a key thing that we're going to do. So now you have a game, which is a voting game with strategic interactions. And in principle, you have to take the data and kind of go at equilibrium and recover the deep parameters. What we're going to do is something slightly different, kind of building on this idea, the Hudson-Miller or BBL for dynamic games, estimation of dynamic games. We're basically going, and in my work with Matt Schum for voting with interdependent values, we're basically gonna obtain the conditional voting probabilities or conditional choice probabilities from the data. And then once we have that, we're gonna say, well, this is coming from equilibrium. So an agent's belief about the likely action taken by others is going to be the same as what the uncertainty in the data reflects. So I'm going to take those estimates for the conditional voting probabilities of others as each agent's beliefs about how the others are going to behave. That's going to allow me to separate the game into n independent decision problems once I do that. And then I'm going to estimate the parameters using the best responses from there. So two objects that are going to be coming in the talk is gamma, I, omega, R. So this is the probability that Ms. I recommends a hawkish policy in state omega in regime R, right? And that's going to be pi times omega, because if you're an expert, you're going to follow the state, and 1 minus pi times sigma I r omega, which is sigma I omega, is the probability. It's the same thing, but for a strategic decision maker, right? So this is the probability that a strategic decision maker recommends a hawkish policy in state omega in regime R. Yes. So given this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on best responses. I'm not going to tell you much about equilibrium, although I could. So let's go to best responses. So the first thing is, once you realize that this difference in payoffs of voting 1 or 0 in state omega is basically the probability that the state is 1, if you just do the little algebra. So this is going to be probability that the state is 1, given your information, minus pi, your bias, right? So given this, if you do I should have said this. Let me see. So this is what we have, right? So what I'm doing is I'm doing the net expected payoff of voting 1 instead of 0, right? So that's why you're going to have this for 1 minus 0. And we're going to have the differential here of the beliefs, right? So we're going to have that voting in favor of a hawkish monetary policy is going to be a best response after observing signal I, SI, if and only if this happens, expression 2. Now, if we had delta I equal to 0, so no career concerns, no reputation value, then we go back to a kind of myopic expressive model where I'm going to vote for a hawkish policy if the posterior belief that the state is 1, given my information, is above pi I. And again, pi I here is this thing that you should, if we had put different numbers on those state contingent payoffs, pi I would be this function of whatever is coming inside those type 1, type 2 error codes, right? So this is the hurdle that the information has to surpass in order for me to vote hawkish, in principle. But then I have the reputational consideration. So this is what is the expected benefit for me voting for a hawkish policy, sorry, for a dovish policy instead of a hawkish policy, given my information, right? So this is my expectation about the beliefs that the principal is going to have once I vote in this way, and the others vote in whatever way they vote, right? And I'm going to form expectations about how they're going to behave. Now, with no career concerns, I'm going to vote for a hawkish policy if and only if the posterior is above pi I. This we've seen. Now, because you can see this is a constant, this is a monotonic function of SI, so this is going to be a cutoff strategy with a cutoff exactly given by, making this an equality. The second term captures this net expected reputational gain of a dovish recommendation given signal SI. The key thing I want to say, without going too much into the details of what's inside here, is to think about the strategic uncertainty, right? To think about how the strategy of other members affect my problem, right? And my argument is, let's say we're in a committee and I'm trying to convince my principal that I'm a competent person, right? That I'm an expert. You're going to take actions. How is your strategy going to affect my problem? Well, your strategy is going to affect my problem only by affecting the principal's beliefs about my type, right? I don't care in the model as it is. I don't care about how you behave other than that. Now, in particular, so if we think about how your strategy is going to affect the principal's beliefs about my type, the only thing that matters is your conditional vote probability, is the probability that you vote hawkish conditional on the state being 1 or on the state being 0. This is what the principal, remember, like what the principal is trying to learn. What can the principal learn from you about my type? You cannot tell, the principal by your vote if I'm an expert or not. What you can do is your vote is going to be correlated with the state, and your vote is going to inform the principal about the state, and the principal is going to use this additional information about the state to make a better inference about my type, right? That's the channel. Because of that, the only thing that matters is not the general form of beta, of your strategy. What matters is, what is the probability that you vote 1 in state 0? What is the probability that you vote 1 in state 1? This is all the principal needs in order to form a belief about the state and therefore be better able to judge me. So this is going to be key for our estimation strategy, right? So, but given that, I'm going to just write this as, I'm going to vote 1, given information SI, if the posterior is above pi I plus delta, and then this term psi R, which is the expected reputational gain from a dovish recommendation in state omega, right? So I decompose this as, there's going to be, given my signal, I'm going to make an inference, my personal inference about how likely is it that we're in state 1 or state 0, conditional on state 1, given that I know in equilibrium, I know your gammas. If we're in state 1, I have a distribution over how you guys vote, and I'm going to use that. The principal also has that, and she's going to use it to form beliefs about the state. But this is that term, right? This is my expected reputational gain when I'm in state omega. Is that clear to some extent? Yes. I should say, is that completely clear? Yes.
It's clear. But just did you mention anything about multiplicity of equilibria? Because if pondering, okay.
No, go on. Say more, Max.
No, just to say that with career concerns, you can have this sort of traps where everyone believes something because everyone is wrong, because everyone has career concerns, and that's confirmed, and that's when omega is unknown. Obviously, that's where the belief can also be wrong in that sense.
Well, I don't know that the belief would be wrong, right? So the belief, I don't know that. So the belief would be consistent with that equilibrium, right? Whatever equilibrium is selected.
Yes.
Even
it's
if
equilibrium that is wrong.
Okay, so this is, I don't know if it's wrong, but yeah. So I think we're like yeah. I think I don't know that I can say more about that. But let's say there are multiple equilibria. I don't know. what I'm going to show you is that there are unique best responses given the gammas of the others. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the equilibrium that is being played in the data as the equilibrium selection. So I'm going to use the data I'm going to make the assumption that that if there are multiple equilibria, they're playing the same equilibrium in the data. And then I'm going to use the data to recover parameters given equilibrium behavior observed in the data. Yeah. I can say a lot more about that because, yes, but yeah, but let me take it for now. Okay, so first thing is the general problem, right? Like, so this is where we are in terms of like when you would vote for a hawkish recommendation or a dovish recommendation. Now, there's a lot underneath this, and there's no way for me to make it justice in the time that we have today. But I do want to make, so in the transparent regime, you see all votes, and therefore the psi t function is going to be actually, right? So what is the posterior the principal is going to have is going to be, the principal is going to observe the array of votes of my fellow committee members, and she's going to observe my vote, right? So this is she sees VI and V minus I. And she's going to make an inference about whether I'm an expert or not. And whether I vote 0 or I vote 1. In state omega, given that I have these gammas, I'm going to have a distribution over the votes of others, so I can form this expectation. The key thing, as I said before, is that these posteriors, these beliefs by the principal, are going to be a function of these gammas, right? And as I said before, the point is that the gammas and the V minus I affect the principal's posterior about omega. Yes. In the opaque regime, the principal is only going to see the aggregate outcome, right? Going to see the committee adopted a hawkish recommendation or a dovish recommendation. So here, this psi function takes a different shape, right? Because the strategic uncertainty of how others behave, it's basically gonna, so think about when am I gonna be, if the principal only observes the aggregate outcome, when is my vote gonna affect the possible ways in which the principal can judge me is if I'm pivotal, right? If I'm changing the committee's recommendation. So because of that, the only key, while here I have uncertainty and I'm going to care about the entire distribution of possible vote vectors, here the only thing I care about is what is the probability that I'm pivotal, right, in state omega, and then conditional on that, the posterior that the principal would have about me being an expert or not if she observes an aggregate outcome being 0 or an aggregate outcome being 1. Now, if I were to go into more details, so first of all, what I want to say is that this also is a function of just the gammas, not the full beta. So again, we can get rid of the strategies of others. The only thing that matters about the strategies of others is just the conditional vote probabilities. In this case, it's actually going to be even more simple in the sense that the way gammas matter here is through the probability of being pivotal, that I'm pivotal in state omega, and the probability that the hawkish recommendation would be already adopted even without me, right? This term that I'm calling W in the paper that I'll send you at some point. So all those gammas are going to affect the probability that the proposal passes already, that a hawkish policy passes without my support, and the probability that I'm going to be pivotal in state omega. Those things are inside those. See.
Yeah, we have about more than 10 minutes, but.
Oh, 10 minutes? Oh, I'm doing terrible. Okay, so yes, so the key thing then is that, and I could show you this, is in each regime, the unique best response is going to be a cutoff strategy. So there's going to be a cutoff psi IR, And then with this, I can get the probability of making a hawkish recommendation in state omega if you're a strategic agent. And then the cutoff is going to be given by the equilibrium condition that I have here in each regime. Okay, so given that I completely mismanaged my time and I only have 10 minutes, let me go quickly through identification. So the basic idea is what? So first, I'm going to go to the first stage, right? So the gammas, as we saw, are functions of equilibrium play, right? But I can take them as a number, right? If I take them as a number, I can estimate them because the likelihood is a mixture model, right? So with some probability, I'm going to be in state one. If I'm in state one, I know the probability that each person votes one in state omega, in state one, etc. And so I have this likelihood. This parameters gammas, the gammas and the rho are gonna be identified by standard argument. So simple MLE, and I get what I'm going to call the first stage results in terms of the gammas and the omega. Once I have that, I can use that to recover. So, I have a system of equations, and through that system of equations, I can recover the probability that you're an expert. And once I have that, I can go back to equilibrium conditions. And in a sense here, you can take your theorist hat off, put the econometrician hat on, and solve the equilibrium conditions in a different way. So the other way around, right? You're going to go from the data that you have and the quantities that you've estimated from the data to disentangle what is delta and what is pi using the equilibrium conditions in the two regimes. So this is the key identification strategy, right? So I have the two regimes. I know there are, in principle, if I only had data from one regime, I couldn't separate delta and pi because both are going to affect the things. And so I would have like a curve for that. But because I have two equilibrium conditions for each regime, I can use those to separate what's delta and what's pi. Estimation follows the identification argument. So I'm going to go estimate this, the first stage. Then I'm going to recover using best. Then I'm going to use best responses. So the basic idea, imagine, is if I have a theta delta pi, I can compute the best response. With that best response, I can give you a likelihood of voting one or not in whatever state and whatever environment. So that's how we're gonna do. We're gonna do one more thing, is we're gonna basically pool information. So the way we're gonna pool information is we're gonna say your D parameters, theta, pi, delta, are going to be functions of observed characteristics of the members. And then what I'm going to be optimizing over in the likelihood is the coefficient. So imagine if theta is x beta or z beta, then what I'm going to be having trial values over is the beta, right? So we're going to have, if this covariate takes whatever value, and I have a trial value of beta, that's going to give me a theta delta pi. The theta delta pi is going to give me through equilibrium a best response and a gamma. And then I'm going to go with the gamma and look at the probability of voting 1 or 0 for this member. And the key thing is that I can do this member by member, not because I'm ignoring the strategic interactions, but because I'm including the gammas of the other people that I've estimated before in the problem of I, right? So all the strategic computations, all the beliefs, everything like that is going to have the gammas of the other people in there. Okay, so let me go to the results. Oh my God, how badly did I manage this time? So first, the prior. So we have a prior function, right? So the prior, so this comports well with what we observed. What we're using here is information that these guys had at the time. So when we say expected, it's the expected by them at the time that they were taking the vote, right? Not the recession data and numbers that are coming after, right? So the recession, the recessions as with exposed information are these gray bars, and we have that our estimate of the prior is is monotonic, positive increasing with expected growth, with inflation decreasing in unemployment and the prevailing Fed funds rate, and the prior tracks the evolution of the economy pretty well. Now, this is an impossible table. I'm not putting it here for you to make a lot of sense of the numbers, but I just want to kind of ground like thinking here, right? So yes, we have a prior function, right? So this is a rho that is a function of this economic fundamentals. And then we're going to have in this first stage, the gammas be a function of covariates of macro covariates, not because they affect the deep parameters, but because they affect rho, and through rho, they affect behavior. And then characteristics of the members, right? So we're going to allow all these conditional choice probabilities to be a function of individual characteristics and economic fundamentals. So once I have that, it's a table that you cannot make sense in the 20 seconds I'm showing it to you. But, like you have for governors and presidents in opaque and transparent in state 0 and state 1. That's why we have 8. So once we have that, I can show you, I can basically put in the covariates and recover the estimated gammas. So what I have here for you is, so if you think, so what's here? This is a conditional choice probability. This is the gamma 1 in inflationary state in booms and gamma 0 in recessions. So if you're a very good decision maker, you would want the, to vote 1 when inflationary and 0 when recessionary. So you can see that transparent in just the first stage dominates opaque in particular, and the scales here are different. So this is not such a big difference in inflationary in booms, but in recessions, the opaque, people are missing it in the opaque regime. So this is the first go-to. Okay, so if I have, so once I have that, I have the gammas. Again, first stage, I didn't put much of the model yet. So you can compute the probability of a correct recommendation just straight from the data. And I can do that so by that I mean rho times gamma 1 plus 1 minus rho times 1 minus gamma 0. And I can do this for governors and presidents. So you can see here the probability of a correct recommendation. And what we're plotting here is the median gamma bar for each meeting throughout the sample. And what you see here is that governors are typically doing better in ex-ante probability of correct recommendation, which I understand that this is not the only thing that matters, but in ex-ante, they're outperforming the presidents throughout the sample. Now, as we know, we care about the different types of mistakes because we might have a different evaluations of errors in different states. So this is the same conditional on the economy being on a boom, on conditional on the economy being in a recession. Now, this is an empirical quantity, but it's in a sense very theoretical because this is the probability of a correct recommendation if that state were realized, right? But we know, like if you look at the prior function, right? So here, the probability of being in state 0 is pretty low, right? So those errors that we make in that state are not gonna be too influential for us, but no matter. So you can see that there is not much difference between governors and presidents in booms, but there is a bigger difference in recessions. This is what we saw before just when I showed you the distribution of the gammas. Now I'm going to go to the main results. So the top panel is plotted. So I'm going to start with the structural parameter estimate. So here I'm plotting precision, bias, and reputation. What am I plotting in particular? I'm plotting the estimate for the median value of theta, pi, and delta in the sample and the inference, right? So the standard error distribution of our estimates for that particular person, right? And you can see so then that the typical governor has better information than the typical president, is more dovish, right? So you can see that this is moderation. So the presidents are hawkish, right? They have a cutoff, a bias, sorry, that is below 0.5. So they're more willing, so for even at below a half, they would go for a hawkish recommendation, opposite with the governors who are more dovish. And the typical governor also has a higher value of reputation than the typical president. This is the evolution, the smooth evolution of those estimates for the median in each meeting throughout the sample. And it's interesting, but I don't have time to go through it and discuss. But so better precision, more moderate, more dovish for the governors, and higher value of reputation relative to decision payouts. Now, this is for the median, and this is inference. So here I'm going to show you the distributions, the empirical distribution of the estimates for the set of presidents and the set of governors. So what you can see here is that there is a lot of heterogeneity within class, right? So when I say the typical governor is more career concerned than the typical president, yes, but there is a lot of heterogeneity within groups. Okay, so now I have the model, and I can say I have the parameters of the model, so I can remove career concerns. Of course, this is not a tool. This is just as an analyst. And I can say, how would they have done without reputation and with reputation? With reputation is what we observe in the data. Without reputation is what we do in this kind of counterfactual, right? So we can see here that in the ex-ante, the reputation is increasing the efficiency of recommendation, right? Increasing the probability of a correct recommendation ex-ante. And when you disentangle it between recessions and booms, you can see that that reputation is helping in recessions and typically hurting in booms.
Yes, if we could finish within 2 minutes, that would be great.
Okay. So I'm gonna try. Okay, so what we do now is to say, okay, I've shown you opaque and transparent, but what I can do is recompute for all the points in the sample, what would have happened in a single regime, right? So what would have happened if these decisions had been made with transparent or opaque? And what we can see here is transparent outperforms opaque throughout the sample. If you can also separate by booms and recessions. And I do want to take a second to talk about the distortions in a sense. When we think about pandering, right? So the first sort of thing would be, okay, so you would pander if rho is bigger than a half and your cutoff is with reputation is below the cutoff that you would have without reputation, right? You become more hawkish when the prior is above a half, and you would become more dovish in the opposite. Now, I cannot do it at pi because the conceptual definition of pandering is thought for a situation where the agent has no bias. So I'm going to compute pandering for the moderate, perfectly moderate agent, and then I'm going to compute what I'm going to call bias signaling, which is this difference between, so the total change would be the change in behavior from what you would do with career concerns and what you would do without career concerns, given your characteristics and your bias, but I'm going to remove the pandering out of it. Now, as you can see here is our estimates of pandering. So you can see that in this model, you have anti-pandering, and the anti-pandering is bigger after transparency, in the transparency regime. So you can think, this is the dominating effect, but when I show you the total is the total change in the cutoff from no career concerns to career concerns, pandering is the blue line, and you can see that the bigger effect quantitatively is not pandering, but it's the bias signaling, right? It's the fact that if I'm hawkish in reality, and I want to convince you that I'm an expert, I'm going to play against my bias so that you think I'm moderate and an expert, right? So this is what dominates, not throughout, but but typically dominates the differential in behavior between career concerns and no career concerns. And these are membership counterfactuals. So what we said is, okay, imagine you had only governors appointed by Democratic presidents or Republican presidents, or only district presidents, or only people with central bank background or business background, or economics background, or finance background, only female members, only male members, only rookies, only senior members. And what we did is draw samples of 7 members from this population with whatever characteristic, compute equilibrium, and do it like if we have 1,000 samples, compute it for 1,000 samples, and then compute our outcomes and then report, right? And what we see in general, this is, I don't, like, it's impossible for you to get it as we're going so fast, but what I can show you is typically transparent dominates opaque, which dominates no credit concerns. And this happens independently of the membership that we have. So I'm gonna, and sometimes, for example, you know, what you see is that transparency is sometimes undoing some bad, some what would be bad effects if we had biased people or from the get-go, right? If you had dovish or hawkish people, because transparency, because of this bias signaling, is making people more act as if they were more moderate, and therefore they're hitting the state in ex-ante terms better. Of course, there is a trade-off in terms of errors on one side and the other. So I am going to finish because I know that I must be over limit.
Thank you very much. Let's do the official finish. Thank you very